Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Building a Bridge. My name is Jesse Brisendine.
My name is Countess, and our mission is to empower people to use their voice to build a bridge beyond race relations, creating unity and understanding, and effectively raising the collective consciousness of humanity.
Last week, we entered into a conversation with our guest, Tony Rodarte, who agreed to come back with us today. And we started talking about police relations and got into really some fascinating discussion. Tony's graciously agreed to come back and answer some of your questions directly today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being back, Tony. So we'll go ahead and start off with you were mentioning you wanted to talk about a little bit about some of the training and what goes into the hiring process of becoming a police officer. And I think that'd be really valuable for people just to conceptualize what that process is like to going from wanting to become to actually becoming an officer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of value if we just talk about the foundational component of training and hiring. Really, what does that look like? Let me, if I could, you want me to talk a little bit about the hiring process first? Do you want to go right into the training? What do you guys prefer?
Yeah, I think it would be great. Just like what hiring process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, and this is just my perspective. This is what I went through when I was getting hired in the mid to late 90s. It's a little bit different than it is now, but structurally the process is pretty much the same. You have to do a written test, and there's hundreds upon hundreds of applicants testing for a handful of positions. Now it's different. There are definitely more open positions available, but you go through a testing process first, and then they glean the top scores out of that, and then you move on to a physical agility test, and that's very standardized. For me, it was a 1.5 mile run. You got to do some push-ups, sit-ups, a body drag. There's a couple different variations on what that looks like, but there will be some type of physical agility tests. They just want to make sure that you are physically capable of doing the job that you're applying for. And those two things, I'll be honest with you, weed out the vast majority of everybody that applies for the job. Once you get through those two, you get really specific on kind of some of the next steps. So a couple of those next steps are you have to go take a polygraph, and they'll ask you very uncomfortable questions, and they get right down to it. They don't play games on the polygraph. They'll cover your drug abuse, or if you've used drugs, if you've committed any crimes that were not detected. There's no personal space when you're taking a polygraph, and intentionally, because they want to make sure they know who the applicant is. And then you'll do an oral board. And I apologize. I guess if we're going in order, the oral board would come before the polygraph. So you'll do an oral board, and that usually consists of some type of personnel from their command staff. It's usually 3 or 4 that will interview a single applicant. And there'll be several questions. These are not quick interviews. You're probably looking at 30 minutes minimum, I would guess. It's not uncommon for one to go longer than that. And there'll be the standard why you question. But they'll also have some scenario questions that you need to be prepared for. They may ask you questions about the community that you're getting ready to serve or that you're applying for. They may ask you demographically, what does the community look like? They may ask you questions about local government. So you really need to be prepared if you're going into this for what that specific community looks like. After that, again, you'll do a polygraph. You'll do a psychological evaluation. So before you will ever be hired, you have to be psychologically cleared. And I don't know if most people know that, but it's a standardized process you have to go to. You have to take a test. You have to be evaluated. And those two are very specific. They ask you a lot of questions, but there's certain, and I can't get into the science behind it. I'll be totally honest with you. I was just on the applicant side of this, but there's a very specific candidate they're looking for. And I don't know all the specifics behind that. Once you do that, you'll also have to get a medical. You have to get a medical clearance. The police academy itself is very, very strenuous. And you have to be physically prepared to be able to do that. So you have to have a medical clearance that basically says it's safe for you to enter this environment of a police academy. That's a long process. It's super easy to talk about, but you're talking about months upon months upon months. It's not uncommon to start this process and be in the process for 6 months or 12 months. again, now because they're doing so much hiring, because so many guys like me have retired, it's probably streamlined a little bit, but it's a very long process. I'd like to talk about hiring, about training, but before I transition, are there questions you guys have about the hiring process?
I definitely have questions. I know you can't answer as to what type of applicant they're looking for. I had a knew a guy who was a former Navy SEAL who I think he didn't get into the police after he left, and I was pretty sure it's because he failed the psych. So the psych eval. I think he was physically capable. I'm pretty sure he failed the psych eval portion. So I guess for me, it kind of begs the question, I guess you'll always have people slip through the crevice, right? But like, how do you, I guess we could probably answer this later, but where do you think things go wrong? Because it sounds like, you screen and do everything that people want you to do to pick the best of the best people for the job. And I guess that's why everybody says 99% of cops are good. And in the majority, like by the way that our society is structured, and, even though we do have problems, overall, we live a pretty safe country, right? We live in a pretty great place. And so it kind of makes sense that these hiring processes are doing their job decently. But where do you think maybe some of the holes are? And, what do you think goes wrong that like, you have like a Derek Chauvin, right? Or
Yeah,
a police officer that slams, a 16-year-old girl to the ground or something like that.
Sure. So these, as great as these practices are, the hiring practices are, and I think they're great. I think they're probably as good as they can get, but you're going to have people fall through the cracks. It's going to happen. It's not a perfect system. It's a good system. You could even say it's a great system, but it's not a perfect system. I also think this job changes people. I think when you get onto this job, I think oftentimes you're different from the guy that got hired to the guy that you are 20 years later, 15 years later. Again, not everybody goes south. Not everybody turns into a bad cop, but it happens. You have guys that and it's not just guys. You have men and women that are impacted by this profession negatively. Thankfully, those are small numbers. The vast majority are not, but it does happen.
Tony, I wanted to just follow up off of that real quick. The psych eval, the polygraph about hiring, is there any additional, as the job goes on, like a 6-month psych eval polygraph or a 1 year or a 2-year psych eval polygraph? And if not, do you think that there might be any value in that if there was some sort of ongoing accountability or check-in piece or something like that with officers?
I think we got to do a better job with the mental health aspect of it. And that's really what it comes down to. Once you clear your psychological evaluation, you're not going to have another one. Now, you will if you get involved in a shooting. An officer-involved shooting, you're most of the time, you're going to have another psychological evaluation to make sure that you're good. You're definitely going to have some time off. You'll be reevaluated. But shy of that, I mean, if you serve out a 20-year career and you never get involved in a shooting, you never involved in any criminal activity or anything like that, you're probably never going to be evaluated again.
Wow.
At least, again, from my perspective, when I went through this, I can't answer for anything that may have changed in the last couple of years, but I really doubt if we've had that much change, to be honest with you, in the last 2 years.
And just to piggyback off that, when you were saying before that, like for a lot of officers, the job changes you. And I can totally get that. Like when I talk to friends from law enforcement and some of the stuff they share, I don't see how it can't change, somebody, just the experiences and what you're going through. And I'm wondering then, for those kinds of things that is causing change, how much of that is actually related to officer-involved shootings? Because it seems like, my perception is officer-involved shooting would be the small amount, but then the majority of maybe that people are going through isn't involved in shootings, but then it's like the majority of things that are changing aren't the ones that have the follow-up with it, which maybe goes into more the mental health piece.
Yeah, I do agree. The shootings are a very small aspect. So statistically, most officers are not even going to be involved in a shooting. I did a 20-year career. I was never involved in a shooting. I was never involved on the shooting side of a shooting. Those are very rare occurrences. I think where guys and girls get into trouble is long-term effects on just things they're seeing, day-to-day operations, things that they're exposed to. And if you don't have the appropriate mental health aspect to guide you through that process, I think people can get in trouble.
I think it's like you said, or like we talked about in our last talk, where the job of a police officer is to deal with the ugly things in the world, right? The criminals, right? Criminality. And most people don't know how bad of a world we really live in. And so then you become a police officer and you don't know, like, no one, you can't, even a regular 18-year-old, even that grows up in a bad place, doesn't even know every bad thing that happened, right? And then you become a police officer with this idea that you're going to fight crime, and then you're like, wow, like, oh, the world really is, this is crime, like this is really rough, and you deal with it on a regular basis. So anyway, I think I know we're gonna get into our questions, and I know we're gonna do training, but I think we answered one of the questions that somebody had. Sorry, we posed questions to the group. I'm jumping all over the place. These guys are gonna get upset with me, but we posed questions to the group, and I wanted to make sure we crossed off some of those questions just right now as we were going. And so we just went through the whole hiring process. I guess one of the questions was, what type of personality is attracted to becoming a cop? And I think in that hiring process, I think they screen out that pretty good personalities, right? It seems to me like
they know what they're looking for.
Yeah. It seems to me like they get people that want to do the job, and then maybe the job affects them, and things go south sometimes.
Yeah,
Tony.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jesse.
Oh no, I just, if you don't mind, I know you want to get into the training piece of it too, and I'm really excited to hear about that. And I wanted to know just one other piece of this, and maybe this all goes into the mental health too. Is there, for most of us who have quote unquote normal jobs, if we're having a bad day, there's a fight at home, we find out our spouse is having an affair, somebody gets sick, whatever it is, we show up and we're broken, and we have to deal with whatever it is we're dealing with. We're not having to deal with necessarily situations where we're then going out and seeing some sort of horrible thing happening, and like to happen to a kid or something like that. And I guess that's a long way of saying, is there anything in the police department or in law enforcement that maybe protects officers who are going through challenging personal things, to be able to help them create a barrier of separation between the emotion that they have at home and not bringing it into work?
Sure. Yeah. Most agencies have what they call a peer support group. I was, to be honest with you, I was never a huge fan of peer support, but those do exist. I will tell you this too, just from a personal perspective. Those are conversations I would have with my wife. So I worked patrol for several years. Most of my career was spent in investigations, and over half was in homicide. But I spent a few years in patrol, starting working weekend nights. And guess what? We're human. I'd have bad nights. Things just weren't going right at home. Not clicking with my wife. Maybe it's an argument. Maybe it's something we didn't see eye to eye on. And then boom, I had to go to work. And now I'm thinking about that discussion with her, and how am I going to resolve that at home? And what does that look like? And yet I got to be locked on because I'm now going to a hot call of a family fighting or shots fired. And I would tell my wife all the time, and my wife's amazing, but I'd get to that point and I'd have to say time out. I can't go there right now. I got to leave for work in 3 hours. Got to leave for work in 2 hours. Got to leave for work in 1 hour. And I got to be mentally prepared and focused to go to work, because if I'm thinking about you and how I can make you happy and how I can fix this, I'm going to lose focus is what I'm doing. And this isn't a death wish. I don't want to die. I'm willing to make that ultimate sacrifice, but I don't want to add to it. I don't want it to be part of my negligence. And so my wife was amazing. But yeah, absolutely. It's real life scenarios. You're going to have problems. You're going to go to work. I think that's sometimes where people get in trouble if they don't have a great home life. I did. There are peer support groups, and they are available. Most agencies have somebody or a group of people that you can talk to. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't interested in talking to peers in that respect. If I was going to get help, I wanted help, professional help. And ultimately I did do that, but it was after I left. But yeah, it's a great question. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about the training. I don't think we covered this, but I wanted to talk about the age. So in Arizona, you got to be 21 to be a police officer. That's incredibly young. I don't know where you guys were at 21.
I was in a bar.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew everything. Cocky.
Yeah, you probably weren't in a police academy. So I went through a police academy I was 23 years old when I went through the police academy. And that's pretty stinking young. That's very young. I didn't think it was young at the time. I thought, well, heck, I missed the boat. I could have been a cop at 21. How come I'm waiting until 23? Blah, 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 blah. But that's awfully young. And that could come into play too with some of the concerns we have long-term. These guys that get in super young stay a very long time, and then that occupation completely identifies them and molds them.
Yes. Yes. In the military, they want that, right? I got into the military. I was late in the military. So I was 23 going into the Marine Corps, right? And I was the old man, you know what I mean? Because most of those guys are 18. And so they want the military to define you, but it's such a different mentality, which is why I told I think it was Patty that when she was talking about them putting police, because the whole world is going through this craziness, right?
Sure.
So they've been talking about putting the military on the ground in certain areas in the UK, and she was like super worried, and I was like, yeah, because if you think the police are bad, you don't want the military policing your populace, because then a lot less questions are asked.
Yeah.
And people are not, which is why my buddy who's a Navy SEAL did not get into the police force, because he doesn't know how to deal with, regular people that he's supposed to be, helping them all out, right? Or whatever. His way of handling the conflict is different. And I think that's also probably, like you said, you're so idealistic in your 20s, and you think you know how the world works, and by the time you're 30, you're like, I didn't know shit. And I mean, it's like less than 10 years later, you're like, fuck, I was an idiot, right? You're like, and so, I just can imagine how much that'll shape you, again, when your job is to deal with the ugliness of society, right? The things that, people do that, most 20-year-olds really have no conception of, or they just think, a child homicide is a one-off thing, right? They think it's, you know what I mean? They think that a kidnapping is like, oh, that happens once every couple of years, because they don't know about the thousands that they don't hear about. Then you become a police officer and you hear about these things, and you see these things, and it's like, oh man, I see so much, right? And it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Tony, I didn't know that. And it's fascinating hearing both you and Jared share, because I'm thinking about my experience at 21 years old and where I was at in my life. And I was in college, I couldn't wait to turn 21 because I can buy booze, and I'm in my head all the time. And my worries are like, oh, if that girl talked to me, does that mean she's interested in me? And how am I going to scrape together beer money and then bragging the next morning about how much we drank or whatever, those kinds of things. And the point of that is like, I can't even imagine trying to deal with my own getting to know myself and sorting through my own insecurities and my own issues with, just the things that seem so big to me at that time, and then have the responsibility of a police officer. And so I'm wondering, is there do you feel that maybe if 21 is too young, is there an ideal age that it becomes more of a, I don't even know, because I work with people in leadership positions sometimes, and I think even in their 50s, they haven't emotionally matured enough sometimes to do the stuff they're doing. So I guess it's hard to say, is there a point where we need to have enough life experience or that type of thing to come into where there's a certain maturity that goes into that?
So I will tell you this, there are some recruits that can do this at 21. There absolutely are. And that's why those standards are at 21. They do find people. They know specifically who they're looking for. You know, another similarity, at least for Arizona, firefighters have to be 18 or did when I was applying for police. That's incredibly young too. Most guys don't get in at 18. You do get some guys that do. Same with police. Most guys don't get in at 21. And again, I keep saying guys. I'm not implying that it's all men. Most recruits do not get into the academy at 21. At what's the perfect age? Man, I don't know. We could talk about this for the next 3 hours on what that looks like. I think ideally, personally, I think you got to have a little bit of life experience. Well, I know you have to have a little bit of life experience, and I did. I worked for an ambulance company right out of high school, going to college. I was working on an ambulance. It gave me some real world experience that I knew a police department was looking for. When I was doing that job, 80% of the guys on the ambulance wanted to be firefighters, 20 wanted to be police. That was it. And so that was a good stepping stone for me. It was a place I needed to go. But I knew what the police department was looking for. I knew that they wanted structure. I knew that they wanted people with experience, real world experience. What does that look like? And for me, an ambulance service was able to provide that. I think probably, I think in general, 21 is pretty young, but absolutely there are some 21-year-olds that can do this and have great careers doing that. I did it at 23. I like to think I had a great career. Never had any discipline issues, was never suspended, never any use of force issues, nothing. And I went in super young, and that job molded me a lot. But I also like to think it molded me for the good too.
Yes.
I think we need to not lose sight of that. I don't want to focus on this all turns negative. It all turns bad. There's a massive upside to this. And I like to think I'm an example of the upside.
What was some
That's what I was going to say. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, Jared.
Okay, thanks. That's what I was going to say. I was going to say that I like that they allow people, 21 to me seems like a good age. And I do want the job to mold them to a certain extent. You know, like I said, just having been in the Marine Corps, you want the Marines I joined the Marines to be molded to a certain extent, right? I knew that, right? Going in, I was like, I have some things that I don't like about who I am as a person, who I am as a man, right? And I want to be able to know that I can, or have the tools to discipline myself like that. Am I making any kind of sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Marines instilled those tools in and it made me know that, okay, Jared, you can do this, right? Like if you lock in, you're locked in, you're focused, you can go, right? And it put me in a position where I learned to work that muscle, right? And then honor code and all these other things. So I think you want someone coming in, you know, decently young. I wouldn't want someone wanting to become a cop at 40. Right? No. That would make me fucking super nervous. I'd be like, what do you mean you want to be a cop at 40? Like, I would just think you were, no offense, I would think you were a failure in life. And you're like, this is the job that fuck it, I'm going to be a fucking cop, right? You know, I don't want that. But I think that the other stuff, and I think we're going to keep coming back to that mental health side of it, is that the job can mold you even better and mold you into a police officer that, you know, society really wants, as long as that is there. And I don't think peer groups do it well enough. One, because, you know, there are friends you go to for advice that are going to give you the absolute worst fucking advice in the world. Like, it's just like, did you even think about that before you said it out of your mouth? Like, really? And then sometimes because you're angry or emotional at the time, you'll take them up on it. Like, yeah, let's go. Yeah, fuck it. Fuck her. Fuck that. Right? And it's like, you know, I'll be real personal. When COVID first hit, like me and my wife had a huge knockdown, drag out fight. Over the stupidest thing, and it was just so dumb, and I won't get into the details of it, but it was really upset, and I will say this. She was wrong. She picked the fight with me because she was angry about something else, and which we, later kind of bottom to it. But I have a good friend and client who's a psychologist, right? So I called him up and talked to him. I was like, man, like, I'm going through it, bro. Like, I think this is, I'm done with this, and I'm so mad. And he asked me, I was like, when we have these arguments and fights, it ruins my day. It affects my whole way. I was like, I got a business to run. Can't work. I can't focus. I can't concentrate, and he was like, huh. And he said to me, he was like, all right. He's like, you get so upset. Just let's start off with this premise. You get so upset because you care, right? And I was like, fuck you. Right? You know what I mean? It was like, no, I'm just saying. He was like, I'm not saying you don't have reason to be upset, but the reason that it cripples your day is because you care about this woman and you love her, right? And I was like, oh, right. And so, and so it was like, so whatever you decide, come to it from that place, right? Come to it from the place of, come from, don't pretend like you hate her. Don't pretend like, she's all of these negative things that you say that she is. Pretend like, okay, this is a problem, right? And it upsets me and stuff like that. But the reason that it's consuming your thoughts and everything is because you care so much. If you didn't care, it would just roll off your back like water. And so, I could have called somebody else who would have completely co-signed, right? Like, she's out of pocket, blah, 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 blah. And don't get me wrong, we had to have some hard conversations and stuff like that from a level-headed place. But, there are friends you can talk to that will give you, and sometimes you call those friends, right? Sometimes you want the bad advice and you'll call a friend who's going to you won't call your rational friend. You'll call your friend that is emotional and a hothead and blah, 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 blah. And so I think, like, I would think that that's one of the problems with peer groups. And then the other problem, of course, is gossip. And so, like, are you going to get quality advice from, a peer group? And then, and also, what do you open yourself up to in a work environment in terms of, that kind of a peer group, right? It's just like, I think, especially from cops or, military, if you're still in the military, right? Just if we want to talk about personalities of people that join those institutions, definitely not a personality that, like, I want to show weakness or that kind of weakness with people, not only that are my coworkers, but to a certain extent, they depend on me. And I need them to know every day, more than anything, that I'm dependable, right? So I think that to me, like, in a job of a cop, in a job of, a Marine or a military person, is that I need the person to sit next to me to know that I'm dependable. And for sometimes, we don't have a relationship where I can let you know I'm hurting, and then you can still trust me to do my job, to get the fucking job done. And so, and I think that spreads like wildfire, and fucking, it'll ruin your reputation.
I totally agree. And I also want to clarify too, when I say peer support, so I worked for a county agent. I worked for a county sheriff's office. It was one of the largest in the country. But our peer support group was not all just deputies. We had detention, we had civilians, we had sworn. So I think that's where it becomes a bit of a messy pool. I'm much more comfortable talking to a true peer-to-peer, another deputy that's been through a police academy. They know what it's like. They've been on the street. I know every agency is a little different on what they offer. I will also tell you, we had an informal peer support group just in our homicide unit, the men and women that were holding us each accountable to each other, because I knew every day, a tactical team's like that too. The more specified your field is, the more accountability you have from within. So no matter what your agency's doing, we held people accountable on our squad because my life depended on his or her life. and the actions that they took. So unfortunately, our patrolmen and women don't always get that. I also wanted to clarify too, you know, for we talk about the early 20s. I think optimal is early 20s to get hired. It's a young man's sport. I told my wife that when I retired. You know, I went in, I was 23 years old. I was in the best shape of my life. There's a lot of foot chases, fist fights. There's a lot of stuff that goes into patrol work. I don't want somebody in their 40s or 50s that is out of shape, that can't physically get over a wall. Again, my life's going to depend upon the actions of my fellow deputy, and I want to make sure that they're okay to do that. There's a lot more foot chases than you guys probably realize in law enforcement. They do exist all the time. You got to be in shape for that. Injuries come out of that. So I think optimal early to mid 20s, and I'm okay with 21, 22, 23, fine by me. The federal government restricts entry at 37. So you can't go be an FBI agent for the first time if you're at 38. Now they can't discriminate on age, blah, 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 but they're very particular on how that works. Knowing too, the longevity, they want people that are younger that can stay longer. And you got to be physically fit to be able to handle the job.
Tony, did you want to touch anything more on training too before we move on to some of the questions to the group?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about training. We really haven't even talked about training. Everything we talked about was the hiring process. Training consists of a police academy. At least here, for most of them, at least Mesa, Phoenix, MCSO, ours are not live-in academies. You go in the morning, you go home in the afternoon. Excuse me. There are police academies throughout the country that you live in. We have a handful of academies throughout the state. We have some up north. We have some down south. Excuse me, I don't know what I got in my throat. But that's just the beginning. The whole environment from the police academy is very structured. It's very intense. It's not a touchy-feely. It is a break you. It is a build you down, break you, build you up if we can. But the whole aspect of the police academy is to put you in an environment where they can control what's going to happen. And they can see how you're going to handle high stress. Because if you don't handle it well, what are you going to do in the parking lot of a Walmart when you're the only officer out there and you got a 6'4", 285-pound bodybuilder that wants to fist fight you? How are you going to de-escalate that? How are you going to handle that? So there's all kinds of scenarios that you go through in the academy. They're all high stress. But again, it's designed to control you and to see what you can do. And if you can't make it in that academy, they want you out now. They're not going to limp you through saying, oh man, you got to just try a little bit harder. We need you to get through this because we need the numbers. They know the liability right there. If you can't cut it in the academy, you're not going to cut it in probation. You're not going to cut it in patrol, and you're going to be a massive liability to that agency. So it's designed to, I don't want to say designed to make you fail because it's not, but it is designed to break you. And then they're going to see who they can build up from there. And you got to know that going into it. It's a mental game. Jared can tell you that from boot camp. I never served in the military, but I've done a couple police academies, one out in California, out here. And the whole design is to break you down and build you up. But you have to be prepared right here. And we talk about the mental health and the well-being long-term for law enforcement. But it starts in that academy. And there's guys that can't wrap their head around that. And they can't get it through their head and they end up tapping out. I just went through that recently with somebody that was going through an academy here. Family reached out to offer some support, and I spent every ounce of energy in my body to get him to understand that this is a mental mind game and we can't take it personal. We got eyes on the prize, big picture. He didn't make it. He just didn't make it. And that's what it's designed for. So that academy, you cover everything from firearms training, vehicle. They teach you how to drive a vehicle, high speeds, maneuver, police pursuits, a lot of physical agility, physical conditioning, a lot of arrest procedures, Violent arrest procedures. How do you fight with somebody? How do you arrest somebody that doesn't want to be arrested? A lot of constitutional law. You cover everything. Start early, go late, very, very well organized. Excuse me, from the friends of mine that were in the military, there's a lot of comparisons. I can't compare it. I was never in the military, but a lot of structure. The structure is the most important thing. You can't run a police academy loosely and expect success. It's just not going to happen. And so that's where it all starts. Once you come out of the academy, you never stop learning. The training never stops. There's proficiency training. You got to qualify with your firearm, depending on your agency, at least once a year, some are twice a year. You got to qualify at night. Some agencies require that. Your firearms proficiency is standardized. Every agency, Phoenix PD, MCSO, Mesa PD, Tucson, Flagstaff, it doesn't matter. You have the same qualification annually that you have to hit. It's a 50-round course. There's a minimum score you have to hit, and you got to pass that every year. If you can't pass that, you cannot be out on the street carrying a sidearm and being a police officer. There is proficiency training in other aspects too, depending on what your field is. Like I went into investigations. We had tons of training on constitutional law, search warrants, procedures. We had quite a bit of tactical training too. I was a negotiator for our SWAT team for a few years. So I had that training on that side. There's constantly, you never get into law enforcement and then there's no training. But I think sometimes that's the perception of the public. Like, well, these guys don't know any better. They don't know what it's like. They don't do this. The average person does not know the amount of hours that go into training. Because I was in investigations, I did training all the time on interviewing and interrogating. Body language. What does that look like? There's no shortage of the topics, and it was constantly going on. Every patrol officer had to have so many hours of proficiency training and continuing education. And it never stopped. From day one to my very last year when I retired, I still had to hit my proficiency training to be able to maintain that.
If I may just acknowledge something that occurred to me while you were sharing that, Tony, my curiosity has always been, we often see in the public the examples of the Derek Chauvins or the law enforcement gone bad, and it paints a very broad picture with a very large brush. And thinking of how many thousands of officers who are out there who are dealing with a not necessarily always respectful public, and how few of those instances we actually see on TV. And the reason I mention this is I saw a video that was shared recently, and I believe this was in Texas. And it was officers responded. I'm not sure what the nature of the response was, but there was a couple, I'm assuming, a woman and a man, and they were yelling all sorts of obscenities at the officer, calling him every single name you can imagine, telling him to get the fuck out, terrorist, whatnot, all these types of things. And the officer was so unbelievably calm the entire time as he was trying to address the reason he was called there. And it made me wonder, because I could feel myself getting agitated while watching the video. As I had that, fuck these people. Like, who do they think they are? Like, they don't get to do that. And I think that's something that we're afforded almost as a public, right? Is we have that luxury of being able to have that emotional release on stuff that's frustrating. Most of us wouldn't even tolerate that. And I think of how I hear some of the public outrage projected towards officers, and I hear some of the very not kind words. And friends of mine who are in law enforcement who have talked about how they've been, especially these last several months, receiving death threats, or friends and family are receiving threats. And yet I feel like the instances that actually get put on TV of law enforcement gone bad are so few and far between. And I want to mention that as an outsider looking in, that to acknowledge that at some core level, the training must be working a majority overall well, that law enforcement is able to go and deal with that kind of pressure from that kind of, whether it's a verbal barrage or physical barrage, and still maintain what seems like a fairly low incidence of what the media often seems to like to paint the picture of law enforcement being.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a valid point too. You're 100% correct. I also want to tell you, when we're talking about this training and the structured environment, it's for a lot of reasons, but you have to think about the liability out there. If you do have an officer that goes out there and turns into a Derek Chauvin, and what does that look like? What are the ramifications of that? Some of the training that we do, so every year you have to do firearms. Every year you have to do simulated firearms training. It used to be computer generated. Now that's actual shoot houses. You got to go in and clear them. We're constantly training on knife attacks, things like that. So the general public does not know that within 21 feet, a person holding a knife is a threat to a police officer. And people don't realize that. But I knew, and I was trained, if you're a bad guy and you have a knife and you get within those 21 feet, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to drop that threat. It looks horrible. People don't understand that. And so we do a lot of those trainings too. We would do scenarios where, excuse me, they're very controlled environments, and they would do role playing, and you don't know what your scenario is going to turn into. All of a sudden you're in the middle of a scenario and it could be a guy with a knife, and there's some liability too there. Let's put it on the other foot. What if that guy with a knife gets within 3 feet of me, 4 feet of me? What if that guy with the knife kills me? You think there's liability there? You think if a police officer dies, you think there's family going after an agency, a county, a city, a municipality? There's liability on both sides of it too. So it's not always a one-way street on use of force and what that looks like. But there is a lot of time, money, energy, and personnel hours that are spent on training, and it never stops. It never goes away. It's continuous.
So I just wanted to comment on what you said about the knife at 21 feet. Because instantly, like I thought about my own personal experiences, not as a military person or as a police officer, with people with knives that were far enough away from me that, that I didn't feel like they could reach out and stab me. But then thinking about it from a police officer standpoint, and that's because in an argument or whatever, and I'm not armed, right? One. And two, I'm not there to stop them from doing any harm to anyone else, right? It's not my job to arrest them. So my purpose is I'm just going to keep my distance and leave the scene, right? If someone has a knife and they're 21 feet away from me, so I don't think threat, right? And that's in my personal experience. But if my job is different and I'm a police officer, right, and I'm supposed to protect and serve, and I have a person acting irrationally with a knife in front of me, and so I need to, one, make sure everyone else in the area is safe, right, and preferably get the knife away from the person, or especially if I'm looking to detain them, right, and they have that knife and they're 21 feet is 7 yards. I don't know if anybody can think about people can run a 40-yard dash in 4.5 seconds, right? You cut that down to 7 yards, then somebody can probably cover that distance in about 1 second, 1.5 seconds. You know what I mean? Even a slow person is going to cover it, and a super slow person is going to cover it in 2 seconds. So less than a second, right? They're less than a second away from being able to stab you. And then think about how long it takes to pull your weapon as a police officer, aim and shoot, right? And so I think I'm super happy that you said that, because one, I didn't know it, right? And two, more importantly, as a private citizen, right? I think a lot of times one of the major issues with with everything that's going on is that we think about police officers' jobs, right? Somehow we forget what their job is. I think when we talk about it, we forget, because when you said it, I thought about that situation as a regular person. And I've been in a situation where someone had a knife further away from me. But I never thought about it in terms of my job is to take that knife from that person. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. And they're threatening me with it, or part of my, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, I have to get that person and take them in. Right? It's not like, oh, I have to get out of this situation alive, right? Not only do I have to get out of this situation alive, I have to do something about this person with a knife. And I think that as regular everyday people, when we think about those types of shootings, we're not thinking about it from a standpoint of what we're asking. We're asking that officer to get that person off the street, or that officer's job during that time was to get that person off the street. So I think that, that different perspective about how you handle it, it was completely different for me, right? Because instantly when you said, I was like, I'm not worried about somebody 21 feet away with a knife. But if my job is different and I have to arrest that person, then yeah, I'm going to put them down too, right?
Sure.
Because why? Because why not? At least once they step within that range where they're literally 6-7 steps away from stabbing me, and they're not gonna, you know what I mean? They're gonna come in lunging. It's not like, they're not gonna walk up on my face. I don't know. So I appreciate you. I think those are the type of pictures that we can paint.
Yeah. And
it helps people understand. And then I think that I'm sorry if I'm looking on my phone. I'm looking on my phone for what questions we're answering just by going through. And I think we're breezing through a good amount of them. It makes me happy to hear about the training, because I do think we're doing a good job. But I think that there are gaps, and I think so I think people are thinking big overall looping changes, right? But I think that small incremental changes will create exponentially better results. And so I guess I would ask you before, I don't know if we want to get into questions right now because I know we're running out of time, but I kind of want to ask you, no, let's get into questions. All right, Jesse, you go ahead and handle the first question. But I think we need small incremental changes, and I want to know what you think those are, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into those changes. I just want to clarify, too, as we transition past the 21 feet, because most of your audience is not going to be familiar with this. So I just want to be very clear. What we're talking about is creating that ground. A suspect, closing that gap of 21 feet within seconds, incredibly fast. Jared mentioned 5 to 6 feet steps. You can clear 21 feet in 5 to 6 steps. If somebody knows what they're doing with that knife, they can put that knife in you within seconds, within that gap. The general public doesn't know that. Those are one of the things we train on. And we talk about liability. Everything's liability. If you're standing at 21 feet and you're threatening me and you're going to kill me, those are felonies. You can't threaten to kill a police officer. My job is to now take you into custody, because what's the liability if I don't take you into custody? And now you leave, and now you're gone, or now I let you walk back into your residence, and there's a family that's now in danger. We just don't know. There's too many unknowns. So I don't want to be calloused in saying it's just automatic, although it is pretty much automatic. There are some training standards that we have to adhere to. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback one more question, and then I'm going to keep, that's a really quick ask. And then I'm going to hold us all the time integrity of 20 minutes, because I know, Tony, you have something to do afterwards. I know we want to keep this video within a respectable, and we need to jump to the group questions. When you're talking about 21 feet and putting people down, so just so people also, just a way to conceptualize it, that's the body length of essentially, 3.5 humans. If you think about that's, for most of us, that might be the distance from our kitchen to our living room, or a smaller space than that, or maybe even our kitchen to our front door. So it's a very small space. And I want to, because a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, why do you have to shoot them in center mass? Like, why is that the way? Why don't you shoot them in the hand if they have a knife? Why don't you neutralize it that way? And I'm wondering if you could just maybe address that really quickly. Like, why is it center mass to neutralize a threat if it's like that versus trying to disarm the weapon? And then we can dive into questions.
You only have 20 minutes. Are you sure you want to go there?
Yeah, I know. I feel like, listen, just full clarity too. I have like 50,000 other questions I want to go and evolve into. And I think all of us have so much we can talk, but I do want to keep all time integrity. I know, Tony, you have a tight turnaround after this too. So.
No, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question. So we are trained center mass. If we're put in a lethal scenario and where it's lethal force is justified, and let's use the knife for an example. Let's say this guy is now, he's within that 21 feet. We're given verbal commands. He's not listening. He is a danger. He is a threat. We've determined that we need to stabilize that threat. We're going to shoot center of mass. That's how we're trained. I will tell you, that is a high stress environment. Your brain is bouncing, your body is doing funky things, the adrenaline is pumping, you're in a scenario where you're about to take the life of a human being. I'm responsible for every action that I take, good and bad. So if I do something dumb, I'm held accountable. If I shoot him and he's not justified to be shot, I'm going to jail and I'm being held for that. The problem that we get into is everybody wants to know, why are we not shooting? Let's use the knife for an example. Shoot the knife out of his hand. You know why? I'm not that good of a shot. In that environment, I'm not going to take that chance because I know, again, liability. 100% of what we do is liability. I am responsible for every round that comes out of the barrel of my firearm. And I'm not going to take that chance shooting at a knife and missing that knife, and God forbid, hitting a sleeping child in an adjacent bedroom. It's not going to happen. So if it's a lethal scenario, and that is a lethal scenario, we're going to shoot center of mass. We're going to continue to shoot center of mass until that threat is stopped. So he could be hit once and still moving, twice, third time, still moving, on his knees, lunging forward. He's going to continue to get hit until he's no longer a threat with that knife, that firearm, whatever he has. I also want to clarify too, on the knife thing, people say, well, why aren't you tasing him? Why aren't you using less lethal? Well, our policy, I'm retired. And most policies for law enforcement, if you're the only officer on scene, you can't use less lethal anyway. It's not an option. You have to have lethal backup with you. So in the knife one, it's not even a less lethal scenario anyway. If you're within that 21 feet, you shouldn't even be talking taser. It's already become lethal if you're that close. But if it's greater than that, let's say they're 45 feet. Let's say you're able to establish dialogue. If I'm by myself, by policy, I can't go right to my taser. Because if my taser doesn't work, he pulls out a firearm, I'm holding a taser, I get shot. So you got to have both. If you're going to use a taser, a less lethal, you got to have lethal force. So I just wanted to clarify that. As far as center of mass, it's how everybody's trained. Center of mass, it's the biggest target on the human body. It's where all your vital organs are. Center of mass. We're also trained now, and we started this post 9/11. Center of mass, headshot. Center of mass, headshot. If I'm hitting you and my threat is not stopping, I'm going to transition headshot, 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 because body armor. People are wearing body armor now. We saw that. That was a huge problem in the North Hollywood shootout in the mid-90s in Los Angeles with the bank robbers.
So did they teach you shoot pelvis too? They teach us to shoot pelvis too. In the military.
Yeah, so I was not trained pelvis. I've heard that now, and it may be going on now, but mine was all center of mass, head. But I know pelvis is a critical spot too, obviously.
Because if you shoot somebody, shoot hip bone. If you hit the hip bone, they're dropping. They're not running anywhere.
You want to?
I guess I know we got to get to the questions, and we got time.
15.
I just want to say that 6 to 8 weeks.
15 minutes, guys.
Okay.
And good luck.
Good luck, Jesse. Good luck.
Let's just jump to the questions.
4 questions we haven't answered. We haven't addressed them.
All right. Well, let's try to pick maybe 3 of the questions and then let Tony talk. Do you want to do the first question? I think a lot of Jamie's questions were answered.
Yeah, there's one she asked I think would be important to just, and maybe we can circle back to the end about police profiling.
Yes.
But I think we could come back to it. I know Etienne asked a few questions, and why don't we start with his? Because I think some of Jamie's other ones got. So if you want to go ahead and read his off.
Okay, so I'll start with his first question was, how do the police protect their own that speak out against acts of violence? Or they speak out against improper behavior or criminal acts of fellow policemen, and then encourage. So what is in policing structure, I'm going to try to simplify the question, that protects good police officers who speak out against bad ones? Like, how is that encouraged? And then, what do you think could be done to put it in place so that a good cop can speak up? Because
I think those measures are already in place for the most part. Again, all I can use is my example, but when I was going through, I was never exposed to cops doing blatantly bad things, planting evidence, bad shootings. I mean, that's the media that puts a lot of those images in our head, like that happens all the time. It doesn't happen all the time. The vast majority is these men and women are making the right call on this. There are some bad cops, 100%. We know that. We've seen those examples in the media, but I was never exposed to something like that. I knew that I wasn't going to put a bad cop, was not going to allow them to tarnish my career at all, 100%. I worked too hard for this. I earned the badge that I wore. I earned the honor and the pride that I had, and I wasn't going to let a bad cop tarnish that or take that from me.
I'm a piggyback on this question because I think he expanded on it as well as how do police repair the relationship with the community and be trusted. I think what you're doing right now in terms of explaining what the training looks like, what the hiring process looks like. I don't know why this has not been out on any mass media publication at all, because you see a lot of propaganda about the training that police go through or how poorly trained they are. You hear this conversation a lot, but you don't hear what you've just laid out for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then just to piggyback on what SEN said, I would say if you do have bad cops, and I know you have this experience with the Phoenix Police Department a while ago, if you do have bad cops, they usually don't hang with good cops. They usually hang with other bad cops, and they have like this little nexus, and they don't act bad around cops that they know won't stand up for it. And I think that becomes, probably a part of the issue is that like if you're a bad guy, you're not going to go hang with good guys. Like you're not out there hanging with people that are doing the right thing. You're hanging with people that aren't, and you hide it. You know what I mean? You actually work to hide it. So can you feel comfortable talking about that?
So think about this. So use Phoenix Police for an example, maybe 3,000 certified police officers. The sheriff's office where I worked, we were, I think, 800 certified police officers. You can't possibly know everybody. When I retired out of our office, I didn't know everybody. I knew a lot, but there could have been guys that were doing crazy things. I just didn't know about them. Phoenix PD for sure, when you have that many, and if they're running in those circles, but again, that's not the norm. So I really can't even answer to that because I was never exposed to that. I just knew in my career, I wasn't going to allow my career to be tarnished by the actions of a knucklehead or something that I knew was blatant. I can tell you, I went through my career and I didn't personally know anybody that was doing anything illegal or blatant, anything like that. And I think the general public doesn't realize that. I think the general public thinks we all know, we're all covering up, we're all trying to keep them from getting in trouble. I told you last week, a good cop will be the first one to call out a bad cop all day long. That hasn't changed. It's not going to change.
So I know we got another question, but there was an incident while you were a police officer in Phoenix, and you said it was like 6 cops had done, I don't remember what the exact thing was, but 6 cops had done something or like they were part of something, a profiling incident. And
oh, no. That wasn't Phoenix. That was my agency. That was the sheriff's office. So there was a racial profiling lawsuit that came about. They were held accountable for that. Wasn't anybody I knew. Didn't even know what was going on. I worked in my homicide unit, but we had another specific group that was out and they were profiling. They were racially profiling. They were found to do that. That was absolutely my agency.
You told me how shocked you were when it came out, like they were actually.
Yeah. We heard this was going on. I'm like, nobody's racially profiling. It's not happening. I mean, we all took the same oath. I was proved wrong. They were racially profiling and they represented our agency. In our agency, every sworn officer was held accountable for the actions of a very, very few. But but 100% it happened. One of the questions was profiling. I don't even know if actually, we are going to hit that because I'll make sure we cover that. But yeah, 100%. That happened in my agency, and I had no idea. No idea it was even happening.
That was the next question you were going to ask, right, Jesse?
Well, let's jump right into it. There's a difference between racial. You know what, Jesse, ask the question. I want to make sure we cover the question exactly how it's asked.
Well, the question is asked: do police profile? What is the psyche behind this behavior, and is it fair? So I think that what Jared just contributed, it expands this question a little bit. Between my initial interpretation is are we profiling certain people we might think are criminals? Are we is that tie into racism? So we'll just kind of leave that at that. Is there profiling? What's the psyche behind that?
So you're using the word profile.
Mm-hmm.
Did I profile? I profiled. Did I racially profile? Absolutely not. Did I criminally profile? 100% of the time. There were very specific actions that I would look for when I was in patrol that were characteristic with criminal behavior. And I think people say profile and they just automatically hear in their head racial. That's 100% wrong. Does racial profiling happen? Yeah, it happened in my agency. We dealt with it. Jared just brought up that prime example. 99% of our agency had no clue. 1% was out there doing it, and we all paid the price for it. And this occurred probably 2014, 13, 14, 15. And for a couple of years, they were going through litigation. I was telling my family, they weren't racially profiling. It's 2015. That doesn't happen. Because I wasn't racially profiling in my police car. I wasn't pulling people over because they were black or Hispanic or white. I just assumed nobody else was. And I looked like an idiot when it was all said and done. Because guess what? It happened. Racism exists. It 100% exists in 2020. But criminal profiling, I think, is constructive police work. There are certain things that I know to look for. If we have high crime areas, commercial places, and we have vehicles there at 3 a.m, blacked out, engines running, backed up to a door, that's odd behavior. That's not normal behavior. We're going to check that out. I don't even know who's in that driver's seat. I don't know if they're black, white, or Hispanic until I make contact. So I'm sure not making contact because I think they're a specific race. I'm making contact because that car is out of place at this hour of the morning in an area where we have major commercial burglaries, where we've seen recent sprees, things like that. I know for the most part, bad guys that are on the run, what they're going to do, some of their behaviors. I know for the most part when somebody's carrying a gun and it's printing, things they're doing, body language, they're inadvertently covering, they may walk off to the side. There's certain behaviors that you can profile looking for bad guys. Again, has nothing to do with race. I don't care if they're Asian, white, if they're committing crimes, they should be held accountable for the crimes that they're committing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And then there was one from Patricia about how do you see the future of the police force in the next 5 to 10 years? Will there be more pressure and scrutiny? And then how can we support and improve police forces?
These are great questions, by the way. Can I just pause and thank the group for sending these questions in? Because that's what I desire, to have real conversations about real questions that your audience is thinking about. Where are we going to be in 5 to 10 years? I don't know. I really don't. It depends. If police agencies are defunded, it's going to be bad. We talked about the training. If your budget is cut, what do you think's the first that goes in a police agency? Your training. It's gone. We already spent a ton of time talking about how important that is. In the next 5 years, I think immediately we're not going to see that much huge change, at least out here. I can speak on behalf of Arizona, Metro Phoenix, the police agencies out here. There has to be community accountability. There just has to be. We've got to implement a system where we can do that. I love these forums where we can come in and talk, but guess what? I'm not a cop. I'm not a cop anymore. I'm just a retired cop. And honestly, not most, but a lot of people aren't even interested in what a retired cop has to say. They're interested in what the police department that represents my community, has to say. Now we have groups, community action groups. And these are men and women of police departments that go out and hold these forums with the community. Those are great. We need to keep those up. As a matter of fact, we probably need to ramp those up. And we need to get more intentional about those. We've done them for years, but how great have they been over the years? I think there's a massive need right now. We've got to use that vehicle to go into the communities and talk about these. Let's talk about these topics from the present law enforcement that are representing those communities. And there's topics that we're going to have to agree to disagree on, but let's find the common ground. And if nothing else, let's just share what it's like. Let's let the community hear about the things we talked about here: training, hiring, what does it look like, accountability. Let's have those tough conversations. And I assure you, most police agencies are doing that already. Phoenix already doing it. Mesa, Tempe, Chandler, all the agencies out here, Gilbert, they're already doing it. But we're going to be doing it more, and we probably got to do it on a bigger scale. But there has to be some type of accountability for the police department and for the community too. This is a two-way street.
Yes.
These police agencies are part of your city, and they respect your buy-in, but let's do it the right way. Let's have a forum where we can have constructive criticism and good feedback. And the biggest thing is we have to just keep the conversation going. We just have to. And if there's municipalities that haven't even started it, well, shame on them, but you got to start it now. We can't just keep running from it. The problem's not going to go away. We've got to address it head on, and we've got to be able to accept our deficiencies where we've screwed up. The community deserves that.
I'm gonna say it is a two-way street, because I used to do a little bit of community organizing and stuff like that, and I've been to other stuff because my dad did it for years. I've been to those things, and the people that show up, or the demographic of the people that show up for those types of meetings and things like that, typically aren't the ones out there who are the most angry and upset.
Yeah.
Or that, you understand what I'm saying? Like the demographic is older people. You may have some people who might be like, parents or whatever. You don't see hardly any young people and things like that. And so I think some of the onus for that in the places that, where police are reaching out and creating these conversations, some of the problems or issues are in the community of themselves. Like they're not getting to know their officers when their officers do reach their hand out to get to know them. I think so. So I think it has to be two-way street. It has to be like, not don't get me wrong, at this point, as just because of the way things are going, the way the world is structured right now, the police have to make the effort. They gotta put both arms out, right? Because the public is upset in general, rightly or wrongly. But I'm gonna say that my community, has to then also be willing to come to the table and sit and speak and listen, because this is, I can't even say how much I'm if I were just reading on the internet, I would think police hiring is horrible. And I would think that police training is shitty. You know what I mean? And it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I'll say this, so people put up how long police academy is without noting the 3 to 6 months hiring process or anything else like that. It actually doesn't take, just having been in the Marine Corps and doing a 12-week boot camp, doesn't take that much to learn how to shoot a gun, right? It's like, it doesn't take that much. It doesn't take that much to learn scenarios of when to engage, how to engage, right? What the problem I think comes into play, or like you can train somebody all day for those types of scenarios, but you don't know how they're going to respond when they happen. Like though, like that kind of stuff is like you got to get in the game, and you have to have, on, like you said, consistent on the job training and stuff like that. You have to be out there in the world. So I don't. In other words, the reason I'm saying that is because I've seen people put up, you know, I've seen it, specifically the doctor thing. You learn 8 weeks, spend 8 weeks learning how to take a life. I spend 9 years learning how to save one. The difference is in policing. It's a lot of, it's not as much, goodness gracious, it's not a lot of science. It's a lot of character, if that makes any kind of sense. It's a lot of character. The actual job and the technical aspects of the job and doing the job are not that crazy advanced, unless you become a detective or an investigator or some kind of special unit, right? But as a patrol officer, it's a lot about character. And then do you have what it takes, like on the inside, right? And so you can't draw out training into a year training and make that happen. If I'm making any kind of sense.
It does. And I just want to say this, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jesse. So think about that. So all this stuff we talked about, the police know that. I already know that. I know what the training looks like. I know what my environment looks like. I know that I'm trying to deal with the human aspect of it, raising children, having a successful marriage at home, and then going to work and constantly hearing the criticism from the general public. And again, I don't think it's the voice of the majority, but you hear about it through the media, social media, the news. And then you hear people, well, why won't the cops talk about it? Why are they so rough? Why won't they provide an opinion? That's why, because they're constantly second guessed. They're constantly degraded all of the time. That's the world that we live in. So when things happen and there's national attention, the police aren't going to be the first ones making social media posts about what's going on until they hear all the facts. Doesn't mean they agree. They're just trained. First of all, they're used to just being not liked. And then they're trained to get the totality of everything that's going on. It's just the world that we live in, right, wrong, or indifferent. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to create this environment, but I want you to think about that if you have police that don't want to talk about anything, whether it's topics like this or just engage in any of these conversations, it's because they're constantly living in that world where they're just not well respected. For good cause on some of them, don't get me wrong, for good cause on some of them, but don't lump them all into that category. It's dangerous.
Gentlemen, I'm going to assume the role of police officer here and police the time, because we are now over time of our time budget. So we're going to end this way. I'm going to ask Tony just one final question, and I think we already kind of covered it, but just in case anything we didn't, you can just touch on it very briefly. And this is such a broad question and then maybe just restate your organization and what it is and what you're doing with it, just so people who haven't seen this particular video before can. Also, hold me accountable, Tony, to getting your email address so I can include it with your email address, your website for your organization, so I include it with all the notes and everything. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do all that. And then what I'm going to do is, Jared, I think you could take maybe 60 seconds to just maybe quickly summarize a big aha insight, something you took away from, where you'd like to continue to explore deeper. And then I can do the same, which means I'm giving us a total of 4 minutes, gentlemen, to wrap this up and make sure Tony gets to his program. All right? You guys up for the challenge? So Tony, we touched on this a little bit. Patty asked, I'm probably, wait, don't need that. She said, what is currently in place for law enforcement to deal with the trauma they see every day? I know we touched on this a little bit, just so you can fill in the gaps maybe we missed. What do you think needs to be implemented? What measures can we use to identify and address desensitization in the workplace?
So I don't know what current measures are in place. When I was employed full-time, there were none that I was aware of. I should say, yeah, there were none that I was aware of. They could have been out there. I just didn't even look for them at that time. I know that the environment is changing. I know that mental health well-being is becoming a much higher priority. That is something that our organization is trying to get involved with. To answer your question, our website is compassion-alliance.org, compassion-alliance.org. And what we do is we use our 501c3 donations, and we go after our men and women that are protecting us, saying, look, we care about you, we value you, we love you, we just want to get you healthy. And we want to take that financial burden away from them, so they don't have to use insurance, they don't have to share with their HR or supervisor. We can just get them healthy. I just think we need more of that. There are more and more resources like that popping up. I'm optimistic that we'll continue to see more of those. I want to spend, and I'm being respectful for your time, but there's two things that I want to talk about. And I would be doing a disservice to this if we hit stop recording and we didn't cover it. So just two things real quickly. A Citizens Police Academy. Whatever community you live in, whatever state you're in, inquire about that. Those are great opportunities. You can go in and you can see how your police department works. And they're gonna have real conversations, uncomfortable conversations, but growing conversations. The community needs that. These are great things. I know all of our Valley agencies have them out here. I don't know how often they do them, and if they're doing them now, they're all virtual, and they may not even be doing them because of COVID. But I encourage you to look into that. They're really good resources. You meet a lot of community activists through that. You will meet parts of your town, your city, your local government will be involved with that. Those are really good. I also, and I know I'm at my 2 minutes, but I'm going to be really quick. We spent a lot of time on the use of force. I'm going to encourage you. There was a video that Reverend Jared Maupin did. Jared, I don't know if you saw this, but for those of you that are outside of Metro Phoenix, he's a reverend here in the Phoenix area. And he did a shoot, don't shoot scenario with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office several years ago. It's fantastic. And I have a lot of respect for Jared for doing that because he made himself vulnerable. He thought it was one way. He went in and saw it a different way. So I would encourage you, just Google that. Go to YouTube and look up Jared Maupin, MCSO, shoot scenario, however you got to Google it. Our local news covered it, and it's really good insight as to what it's really like and what some of these scenarios look like. Did I answer the question that we needed, Jesse?
Yeah, I think so. And I think with the nature of any of these conversations, it's going to inevitably bring up 50 more questions that we could go down.
Absolutely.
And I think, and hopefully, Tony, in the future, if you'd be open to it, we can have you back again. And Jared, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to just, share maybe ahas, insights, anything that came up for you during these last
conversations. Okay, I'll take 5 seconds to say thank you, Tony, for coming on, explaining all this stuff. The thing that I really learned was that training wise and hiring wise, the police forces, in my opinion, doing a very good job. I came to the conclusion that the hole that I feel like, and that's maybe we can have you back on and talk about, that needs filling is how the job changes a person and the steps that we can take to minimize that, or to help an officer when they're having a bad day or something like that, or dealing with a lot of other emotional trauma, and how they're processing that stuff, like specifically the mental health aspects of it. And then I think a lot of education for the public for what a real life or death scenario looks like, right? And understanding, what it is that we're asking cops to do. So again, the most enlightening piece for me was the hiring process, how detailed it is, the training, the 21 feet thing, which was something I didn't like, the perspectives. Yeah, so I think I probably used all my 60 seconds up, but yeah, I really feel like I feel like we need to talk about how the job changes a person, right? Because I think people are coming into it with the right intentions and with the right mindset for the most part. And I think that, that's the piece that I would focus on. Sorry.
Well, I would say this, Jesse, and I'll just go real quick. I think that's a great idea. I think we've done a good job in these last 2 videos, just building a foundation. What does it look like? What are you dealing with? I think it would be entirely appropriate to do a 3rd one and just talk about, we dig real deep into the mental health, the well-being of it. And I think I may have just invited myself back on.
I think you did.
But I'm happy to do that, but I also don't want to get in the way. You guys are doing a great thing here, and I don't want the focus to be anything that we're doing. The focus needs to be you guys. You guys are doing an amazing job. So I don't even know if I need to participate in that, but whatever you guys need and whatever I can do to support you guys, I'm willing to do. If we want to do another video or another one after that, I trust you guys. I value your input. I respect the group and the people that are participating. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'll give it right back to you, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you, Tony, again for being here. And I think you did invite yourself back. And on behalf of Jared and I both, I will gladly accept that invitation. One of our contributors, Andrea, mentioned something. She said there's so much judgment, and I think overgeneralizations about the police. It must be hard to have conversations at times. And I just wanted to acknowledge you real quick, Tony, because from my perception, there does seem like a lot of judgment. There does seem like a lot of overgeneralizations in a lot of different categories. And I do think law enforcement, unfortunately, often receives the not so positive end of those generalizations. And so I appreciate you being willing to be here, being willing to be open, being willing to trust, and being willing to have these tough conversations. One thing that I think came from me with all this is the value of having these kinds of forums and communities as an ongoing basis. Unfortunately, we don't come to the dinner table of conversation until the shit hits the proverbial fan. You know, human beings are such emotionally charged creatures, and it's not until we're emotionally charged that we actually start to talk about the things that really matter to us, whether it's these kinds of things, whether it's racial issues, or whether it's what's going on at home with our own families. And I think that there would be a really incredible opportunity for all of us, and I'm going to definitely look into that citizens police to maybe inquire about, look into our local law enforcement, look into going up and having those conversations, see if there is something there, reach out into our local law enforcement, see what kind of community thing there isn't. And if there isn't, maybe we could be inspired enough to start one. Maybe we could be inspired enough to just reach out. I remember several years ago, I went on a ride along because that was something that the community offered, where you could go and do a ride along with an officer. And it was so insightful to me to do that and to see that experience. And then the officer was great, allowed me to ask all sorts of questions, gave me some really great feedback. And it was such an eye-opening thing and gave me a different perspective that I would never had before. And I think that one thing that came from me from all this too is spending this time with you, Tony, the last 2 weeks. You gave us permission to have a different perspective, you know, to maybe see the humanity more in law enforcement, to see some of the effort that goes into training and to remain human from it all. And yeah, I think that there's 1,000 other questions I want to ask, but again, I'm going over my time, so we'll wrap it up there and just thank you everyone for watching and listening and being a part of the Building a Bridge community. I think it's these kinds of conversations that really will help mold the better world we all want to build. And thank you, Tony and Jared, for always being a parts of this.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. My honor.
Thanks,
See you all
Tony.
next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Where's the... And oops, cancel. I just almost